A hacker at an age no one would ever expect breached one of the most critical agencies in America. He manipulated US intelligence and pulled off one of the most bizarre hacks in history. He got his hands on classified information that to this day remains sealed off from the rest of the world. The strangest part, the US government treated the whole thing as a non-event. No punishment, no prison, just a warning. Don't do it again. But the real shock came after, because he went on to do things that made the first hack look like nothing. And he did it all from inside a prison cell, under full surveillance. That's the kind of story we're dealing with today. A story that rewrites what we think we know about cybercrime. If you're new here, I'm Amin the narrator. I talk about everything strange and mysterious that happens on this planet. And as always, don't believe everything you think you know. They told you the war was over, that there's a truce now, but the truth is, the war today is bigger than it's ever been. Victory only comes from God. And today, I'm going to tell you the story of the biggest hack in history. The man behind it is one of the most gifted hackers the world has ever seen. So get comfortable, because this story hits different when I'm the one telling it. Every story sounds ordinary when you read it online, but not when you hear it from me. It all starts in 1981. In a small Cuban town, a boy named Albert Gonzalez is born. He was an only child. His parents had nothing. They lived in poverty for 12 years straight, until they made a decision. They packed everything up and immigrated to the United States, hoping for a better life. They settled in Miami. Albert was around 12 years old at the time. Like any kid, his parents enrolled him in school, and that's where he encountered something called a computer. That machine took over every corner of his mind. Nothing else existed. His classmates were living normal kid lives. Sports, games, hanging out. Albert's only goal was to get his hands on a computer. Once he had one, technology wasn't a hobby anymore. It was the world he lived in, completely and utterly. And remember, this wasn't like today where everyone has a device in their pocket. Back then, being obsessed with tech was genuinely rare, yet Albert was glued to that screen for hours every single day. Not gaming, not watching videos, experimenting, studying, breaking things apart. He didn't play. He spent his days and nights reading and researching one thing only: hacking. The more hacker films he watched, the deeper the obsession grew. The idea that a single person sitting behind a screen somewhere in Afghanistan, or anywhere in the world, could bring entire American systems to their knees. That idea consumed him. He had to learn it. He had to do it. So he started buying books, teaching himself to code and hack, and immediately applying everything he learned. He started lurking in hacker forums online, going by the handle Soup Nazi, a nickname he borrowed from a comedic character in a famous TV show called Seinfeld. Albert was learning and applying at a terrifying pace. By the time he was 14 years old, he accidentally, almost casually, breached NASA's IT department. Now, it was a relatively minor division within NASA, but getting inside a NASA network at all is not normal, at any age. At 14, it's almost unthinkable. The problem was, Albert was still learning. He wasn't careful. He didn't cover his tracks. So the moment he stepped inside their system, he lit up every alarm they had. The breach wasn't hidden, wasn't encrypted, wasn't protected. He was still figuring things out, so the system immediately flagged the intrusion. The moment he stepped inside, the system knew someone was in there. Emergency alerts went off instantly. Security agencies scrambled. The FBI mobilized within minutes. Every theory on the table pointed to a hostile nation-state attack. Maybe a foreign government. Maybe a state-sponsored operation, maybe an international cybercrime syndicate. But when they traced it back, they found a 14-year-old kid sitting in his bedroom. He had broken in from his house at 5 in the morning. He was inside NASA's system for exactly 4 minutes. He didn't steal anything, didn't break anything, didn't even dig deeper, even though he absolutely could have. He just looked around and left, like a curious guest who wandered through an open door. He was polite about it. He didn't cause a single problem. But he was still inside NASA's network. By 9 o'clock that same morning, the FBI had everything they needed, every detail, every data point confirmed. They went straight to his school to verify and make the arrest. And when they got there, every piece of information checked out. The person who hacked NASA was a 14-year-old boy. His name was Albert Gonzalez. The moment Albert saw the badges walk through the door, he burst into tears. Full panic, full breakdown. Agents standing in front of this sobbing kid, completely thrown off. because this child was bawling, and this same child had just hacked NASA. The school called his parents. After a brief interrogation with the family present, they warned him, told him to stay away from this, and walked out, as if nothing had happened, as if it wasn't a big deal. But the FBI agents forgot something critically important. This kid was a national treasure in the wrong hands, and real hackers don't just stop. A kid who can do what he did at 14 years old is not ordinary. He needs to be handled carefully. But they let him go. And here's where it gets interesting. The second those agents walked out of the school, Albert stopped crying and started laughing. He had been performing the entire time. He knew exactly how serious the situation was. He knew that if they actually pushed forward with charges, his life would be over at 14. So he played the scared, innocent kid, and it worked. The investigators believed every second of it and let him go. That moment gave Albert something dangerous. The realization that he was smart enough to fool an entire superpower. Instead of being scared off, he went even deeper into the world of hacking. Around this time, he discovered something called IRC, Internet Relay Chat. Think of it as the internet's version of a chat room. The closest modern equivalent would be Discord or WhatsApp. But back then, IRC was the go-to gathering place for the world's most advanced hackers. Albert spent hours in there, talking to people from all over the world who shared the exact same obsession. People who were just as hungry to learn, to break things, to get inside systems. They traded techniques, walked each other through vulnerabilities, taught each other how to crack corporate networks and expose weaknesses in systems that were supposedly impenetrable. During this period, Albert was advancing at a frightening speed. The years went by, and by 1999, Albert was 18 years old. He'd just graduated from Miami Senior High. He enrolled briefly in college, but he couldn't care less about any of it. Around this time, he reconnected with someone he'd met on IRC, a young guy named Stephen Watts. The two of them had the exact same passion, hacking everything they could find. They agreed to start testing their skills together, targeting corporate networks just to see how deep they could go. Albert was spending most of his time in his room, logged into hacker forums. Every day he was testing new techniques, new attack vectors, new ways to exploit systems. He was starting to understand how corporate infrastructure was built, how networks were architected, where the cracks and gaps always showed up. He ran a few small operations, made some money, but after a while, the anxiety started eating at him. He was always on edge, always looking over his shoulder. But the experience he was building made him realize something important. There was a massive gap between him and the people studying the same field at university. Their knowledge was purely theoretical. His was real, hands-on, tested in the field. So he dropped out, packed his bags, moved to New York, and decided to leave hacking behind for good. The goal was to go legit, get a high-paying job in tech, do it right. He was smart enough. He'd always had a conscience nagging at him. And because of his skills, he managed to land a job quickly at an electronics company. But it didn't last. The company's stock tanked shortly after. They went under. He was back to square one. But within less than a week, 1 week, he got hired by Siemens. Except Siemens came with a serious problem. His direct manager could see immediately that Albert was exceptional, and that made him a threat. So the manager watched him constantly, micromanaged him, suffocated him with rules and restrictions, treated him like a problem to contain rather than a talent to develop. But here's the thing. Albert had spent his entire life as a hacker. He was wired for total freedom. No rules, no ceiling, no one looking over his shoulder. And even the small hacking operations he'd been running were bringing in more money than this corporate salary. And those were the safe, low-risk jobs, the ones that barely scratched the surface. So this 9-to-5 grind wasn't for him. Not even close. After just 6 months, he walked away from Siemens, walked away from New York. There was only one door left open. He went back to hacking. But this time was completely different. This wasn't about small, cautious moves. He had the experience now. He understood networks in ways most people never would. So he reached out to old contacts and joined something called Shadow Crew, the Shadow Organization. It was a dark web platform that brought together hackers and digital criminals from every corner of the world. They traded services. They exchanged everything. The core business was buying and selling stolen credit card numbers, social security numbers, full corporate databases ripped straight from companies. Think of it as a massive black market for cybercrime. Everything was for sale. The moment Albert stepped into this world, almost everyone there already knew who he was. First, because he was no stranger to the underground, and second, because everyone knew the story of the kid who hacked NASA at 14. That kind of legend doesn't fade in these circles. His reputation preceded him, and with his technical skill on top of that, it didn't take long at all for him to establish himself as someone serious. Within a short period, he was rising fast through the ranks of Shadow Crew until he became one of its core leaders. He was close to the top of the organization, making serious money, selling stolen and counterfeit credit cards. But while Albert was climbing higher inside the criminal underground, someone was watching, very quietly. A plainclothes detective from the NYPD. Here's the thing about the FBI. When they identify a hacker, regardless of age, they don't necessarily rush in. They put them under long-term surveillance. Standard procedure. Watch them. See where they go. See how far they reach. See who they connect with. And at the right moment, either you arrest them or you offer them something else. Albert had been under surveillance since the day he was 14 and hacked NASA. 6 years of watching. 6 years of waiting. In the year 2000, the detective decided the time was right. Albert was 20 years old, and they caught him red-handed. Worse than just being caught, he was caught in the act, standing at an ATM, withdrawing cash using a cloned credit card. The detective had been following him, but didn't know the full picture yet. They initially thought they had a small-time crook working alone, but the investigation quickly revealed something far more serious. Albert was the second most powerful person inside Shadow Crew, one of the most dangerous cybercrime networks of that era. Investigators hit him with the threat of decades in federal prison and then made him an offer, the kind of offer we keep seeing in these stories. An offer that could completely change the direction of his life. We won't charge you. You won't see the inside of a cell, but you're going to work for us. We want you as a government informant inside the hacker world. He had no real choice, and he agreed. Better to be a spy inside the hacker world than to spend 20 years in a cell with no internet access. And so he joined the FBI's Operation Firewall, an elite cybercrime task force whose mission was to track and dismantle hacker networks across the internet. But here's the critical detail. Albert didn't sign on just because he was afraid of prison. He signed on because he wanted to learn. He wanted to get inside their heads. How does a federal cybercrime unit actually think? What tools do they use? What are their blind spots? The government provided everything he needed for every operation, which meant Albert was essentially studying at Harvard, except his subject was how to outsmart the most powerful law enforcement in the world. Albert was genuinely useful to them. He thought differently. He was always 2 steps ahead of the agents around him. He combined 2 things that no one else in the room had together: the mindset of a criminal who understood the underground from the inside, and access to the most advanced intelligence infrastructure on Earth. Whatever was new in the world of cybersecurity, Albert was the first to know about it, because he was working with the best intelligence apparatus on the planet. Over time, he started feeding them information about various hackers. But Albert was strategic about who he gave up. He was careful. He wasn't about to sacrifice anyone with real power. He only handed over the small, isolated players, the ones with no connections, no network, no ability to retaliate, people who wouldn't be missed, people who couldn't trace it back to him. He helped the government make a significant number of arrests this way, targeting low-level members, and he kept playing this game, maintaining this double life all the way through to 2004. But that same strategy was creating a serious problem. For the entire time Albert had been working inside Shadow Crew, nobody knew he was a double agent. Nobody suspected that the second most powerful person in the organization was feeding information to the government. But then people started noticing a pattern. Small members kept getting arrested, and somehow the government kept getting it right, every time. How was law enforcement succeeding so consistently? There had to be someone inside, someone with real weight, and suspicion started landing on Albert, because he was essentially the second in command. He knew almost every member. He was the one person the police had never once gotten close to. How is it that the big fish is always safe while the small fish keep getting caught? The suspicion grew, and the FBI feared for his life. If the hackers figured out he was an informant, he could end up dead. So they pulled him out of the field. They told him to go back to Miami and work remotely. And during this period, Albert had been moving around constantly. Different cities, different states because his travel and housing were all managed through the intelligence apparatus. But now, given how exposed the situation had become, they put a new plan in place: protect him, reduce his visibility, get him out of the line of fire, send him back to Miami. This happened at the end of 2004. He settled into his own place in Miami. The surveillance around him was lighter. Communication from his handlers dropped off. First, to not make the suspicion worse. And second, because they'd grown to trust him. He'd delivered. He'd proven his value. And because the surveillance had relaxed, Albert was quietly planning something enormous. During this period, he started studying something closely: corporate wireless networks. He knew that when the internet exploded in the late 90s, most companies rushed to get online without thinking seriously about security. Their systems were riddled with vulnerabilities, and he knew exactly how to exploit them, better than anyone. And his work with the government had only sharpened that knowledge. He now had access to sensitive information about corporate systems that he would never have been able to get otherwise. He could see clearly. The protection these companies thought they had was a joke, far weaker than anyone on the outside could imagine, and a dangerous idea started forming in his head. If he exploited these vulnerabilities at scale, he could become a billionaire in a matter of months. He was already drawing a comfortable government salary, enough to live well above average, for him and his family. But Albert wasn't spending that money. He was keeping it as a shield, a stable, documented income that explained his lifestyle on paper. The real money? He was planning to get it from somewhere else entirely. And when the time was right, he moved on his plan. A technique called war driving. The concept was elegant. A group of hackers park a van near a major corporate building. Inside the van, high-powered laptops, long-range Wi-Fi antennas, professional interception equipment. They scan for the company's wireless network. The second they pick up the signal, they analyze it, probe it, hunt for weaknesses. And with someone like Albert on the team, they could be inside a billion-dollar network within minutes. Albert could pull this off, but he needed the right people around him. He chose two he trusted completely. The first was Stephen Watts, his old friend from the IRC days. The second was Christopher Scott, a highly skilled hacker he'd connected with through IRC forums. Both of them were already wanted by the authorities. But to Albert, they were the perfect team. They got to work. And within just a few months, Scott had already breached multiple corporate networks and successfully stolen data on approximately 400,000 payment cards. He sent everything, all of it, back to Albert. And Albert converted it all into cash. The irony was staggering. During the day, Albert was helping the government hunt these exact types of hackers. And at night, he was one of the most dangerous criminals in the country. As the money started flowing in, Albert's lifestyle began to shift. Luxury cars, expensive apartments, the finest everything. But nothing was ever in his name. He lived a life full of excess, parties, indulgences. But nobody noticed anything suspicious. He was meticulous. Every single expense was calculated and accounted for. Every transaction had a paper trail that looked legitimate. And since he was still handing criminals over to the government, they saw him as one of the good guys, a reformed man doing the right thing. The government looked the other way. If anyone ran his bank accounts, everything looked normal. Invoices covered everything he spent. His finances were perfectly clean on the surface. And underneath that surface, he was generating obscene amounts of money through his corporate hacking operation every single day. That money was all cash, hidden in multiple locations. He was accumulating millions of dollars over this period. Something monumental was also happening in his official life. Albert got promoted twice within his government role. His salary doubled more than once, a sign of just how trusted he'd become. And naturally, a high government salary meant he could justify taking out bank loans, which he used to enter the real estate market. His income level made him a credible borrower. He bought properties, flipped them, looked like a man building his financial future responsibly. But in reality, all of it was part of the plan. And as the operation grew bigger and bigger, he needed a stronger legal cover to justify his expenses. So he opened a legitimate business: tech consulting, web design, cybersecurity services, patching vulnerabilities in corporate systems, all completely legal on the surface. If anyone asked where his money came from, I run a tech services business online. The government itself started seeing him in a completely different light. To them, Albert was a young man who'd started down the wrong road and was now correcting course spectacularly. So they let him give talks and presentations to high school and university students, standing at the front of auditoriums, explaining how he now helped the government protect global digital security. This phase, it looked like the beginning of a new chapter. Albert seemed to be walking away from his past entirely. He helped the US government dismantle much of Shadow Crew. Big members, small members, he gave them all up. He helped them identify critical vulnerabilities in American systems. Vulnerabilities that, and this is the part that should stop you cold, he had exploited himself 1 or 2 months earlier. He was hacking the vulnerability, then coming in and discovering it for the government. He was doing this to build more trust, distance himself from suspicion, stay untouchable, and it worked. Over the years, the surveillance on him became almost non-existent. He'd clearly changed. He had legitimate income. Why keep watching him? Except, there was one restriction he couldn't shake. He was not allowed to travel outside the United States. And his plan was simple. The moment he got permission to leave, he would vanish and never come back. His operations would become bigger and more dangerous once he was out. In his eyes, everything he was doing was preparation. The consulting business, the real estate, the government trust, it was all groundwork for the final move. The operation that would eventually make him responsible for the largest credit card theft in history. As time went on, technology was advancing rapidly, and Albert was always hunting for the next edge, until he found something that changed everything. A technique called SQL injection. SQL is a programming language used by commercial websites to communicate with their databases. Every major website, customer data, accounts, credit card details, almost all of it runs on SQL-based databases. But the problem was, this system had a small but exploitable flaw. An expert hacker could use it to walk straight into the heart of the database. Albert saw the full potential of this immediately. He knew that if he was physically close to a company, like in the war driving setup, and could breach its wireless network, and that network ran on SQL, he could then pivot into every other company that was connected to that same system. Companies existing anywhere in the world, because all these corporations were interconnected through their SQL infrastructure. Breach one, and you potentially have a back door into all of them. That was the door he'd been waiting for. He rebuilt his team around Scott and prepared to go to another level. The first step was building a protection network for themselves. They created 20 encrypted IP addresses distributed across 20 separate locations around the world to mask their real location and make it nearly impossible to trace any attack back to them. Then they started identifying targets, massive companies with millions of customers, companies sitting on mountains of credit card data. They locked in on their ideal target, a large company with mediocre security. Everything was lined up. The attack was ready to execute, but there was still that one obstacle. He couldn't leave the country, and the window was closing. Technology was evolving fast, and the vulnerability might not last, so the decision was made. Execute now. We run the operation, move the money overseas. I stay here looking clean and working with the agency, and I wait. The moment I get travel clearance, I disappear. And so the plan launched. The van parked near the target. Albert broke through the security layer. Once the wall was down, the rest of the team moved in. They planted malware deep inside the network. Malware designed to suck credit card data directly out of the system in real time. And the extraction speed was extraordinary, terrifyingly fast. Very few people in the world knew how to do what Albert did. And the reason he could do it was because he'd learned it while working alongside the US government. They stole everything they needed, got out before the company's systems even detected a breach, and once they were clear, they wiped every digital footprint. No trace, no evidence, nothing to indicate anything had ever happened. The years went by. Albert kept growing, more ambitious, more aggressive, target after target, company after company, until we reached 2007, by which point Albert and his crew had stolen 150 million credit cards. All from globally recognized brands, TJX, OfficeMax, Barnes & Noble, and dozens of others. Every card held thousands of dollars of potential. We're not talking millions anymore. We're talking billions of dollars. At this point, Albert was one of the biggest players in the entire world of cybercrime, and he decided to expand even further. He reached out to a Ukrainian hacker named Maxim Yastremsky. I've made a full video about Maxim. His story is extraordinary, and you should watch it. I'll link it. The collaboration between Maxime and Albert had one clear purpose: selling stolen card data on black markets across the globe. And this is when the biggest data theft operation in history truly began. Why? Because Albert and his team never stopped. Every time the operation grew, so did the greed. The sale of stolen cards stopped being limited to America. It spread to Europe, Asia, everywhere. Albert was leading a global criminal network, genuinely one of the largest hacking organizations the world had ever seen. But like every story of this kind, the bigger the empire, the closer it is to collapse. And we arrived at 2008. Albert was out with a friend in Miami, doing a real estate tour of properties he owned. Completely routine. And then, out of nowhere, a sports car started following them, popping up in strange places. Suspicious stops. Something was off. But they dismissed it. Maybe nothing. 1 week later, the truth arrived without warning. Federal agents raided Albert's suite at a luxury Miami hotel. And here's the part that surprises everyone. You'd expect a dramatic takedown, a manhunt, a long operation. But no, he was arrested cleanly and quickly. Police found unlicensed firearms, 2 laptops, and $25,000 in cash. During interrogation, it didn't take long. They knew exactly how to get to him. They rattled off details of his operations, things only someone inside would know. And Albert started talking. He told them about a barrel buried in his parents' backyard, containing over $1 million in cash. The real shock wasn't the money. The real shock was, how did they know everything? How did they find him? They were reciting the details of his operations word for word during interrogation. That level of detail pointed to one thing. Someone very close to him had talked. The only explanation was that his partner Scott had betrayed him. But the twist that will genuinely shock you, the person who cooked the poison eventually drinks it himself. Here's what actually happened. The US government had zero suspicion about Albert. He was still their golden boy, their most trusted asset. He was as far from suspicion as you could possibly get. But they arrested him because of a tip from an informant. A report that said, the person you trust with your information security is one of the most dangerous hackers alive. Who handed them that file? Not Scott. It was his Ukrainian partner, Maxim. The same Maxim I told you I made a separate video about. His story is incredible because it turns out Maxim was also a double agent. At the end of 2007, Maxim was arrested. When investigators searched his personal computer, they found millions of stolen credit cards, and after decrypting part of his encrypted data, they found something even bigger. Maxim had a regular contact, an anonymous American who kept sending him stolen cards and asking him to sell them. This person's identity was completely unknown, so the government offered Maxim the exact same deal Albert had received years earlier: prison or work with us. Maxim made the same choice as Albert. He cooperated with the government, helped them track down hackers. But the key difference was this: Albert only gave up the small players. Maxim went after the biggest name he knew. And here's the devastating irony. Neither of them knew the other was a double agent. They had been working as partners for months, 2 informants, neither one aware of the other. And with Maxim's help, the government followed the threads. The connections came together slowly. And then all at once, a name emerged from the data. Albert Gonzalez, the man on the government payroll, the man who gave lectures on information security, the same man who had been standing behind the largest credit card theft in history. Gasps. Once they had Albert in custody, the first question was, how had he fooled everyone for so long? And the second, is it even possible that there's no digital evidence left? When authorities finally decrypted Albert's computer, the true scale of the operation became visible for the first time. He had been running one of the largest digital theft networks in the world. Arrests began, one member after another, until 11 people from Albert's team were in custody, all of them charged with stealing data from major corporations and selling it for approximately $200 million. Even Stephen Watts confessed to his role. Admitted he helped Albert write code that opened every door. Everyone who cooperated against Albert got reduced sentences. Some walked away with as little as 5 years. Albert himself, when he realized his entire team had been taken, knew it was over. There was no escape route left. He confessed to everything, every operation. He cooperated fully with the authorities, hoping to reduce his sentence. His lawyers submitted a psychiatric evaluation stating that Albert suffered from internet addiction disorder, a compulsion that drove his behavior from childhood onward. The court took the report into consideration. Albert returned all the assets he'd purchased with stolen money to the government. Every property, everything. On top of that, he handed over classified government vulnerabilities that had been designated as matters of national security. Despite all of it, the cooperation, the confessions, the assets, the sentence was severe: 20 years in a federal prison. Because the scale of what he did was simply impossible to minimize. He hacked major corporate networks. He stole over 170 million credit cards from real people. He served his time in a federal medical center. And in 2025, Albert Gonzalez walked out, released for good behavior, free. The story of Albert Gonzalez stands as one of the most dangerous and sophisticated cybercrime cases in history. A kid who started with nothing, a childhood obsession with a computer screen, and reached a point where he was simultaneously deceiving the government, the criminal underground, and the world's biggest corporations, all at the same time. In the end, not even the smartest hacker in the room can run forever. That was our story today. I hope you found it as gripping as it deserved to be. If you're interested in stories like this one, I'd strongly recommend watching the video about the Ukrainian hacker, Maxim. The parallels between the two stories are genuinely remarkable. Maxim was a double agent too, arguably even more dangerous. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Do you see Albert as a criminal or as a brilliant mind that chose the wrong path? I'll be reading everything you write. This is Amin, the narrator. Take care, and I'll see you in the next video. The Ukrainian hacker, Maxim. The similarities between these two stories are mind-blowing. Maxim was a double agent, and in some ways, far more dangerous than Albert. Leave me your thoughts in the comments. Was Albert a criminal who happened to be brilliant, or a genius who chose the wrong road? I'll see every comment. I'm Amin, the narrator. Stay safe. See you in the next one.